Hey everyone, welcome back to She First Podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Wright, and today's guest is Kay. Hi, Kay.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me on.
So, can you tell our listeners what inspired you to write Mission THAW?
Well, Mission Thaw is actually a true story. It's based on facts. And I changed the names of the characters and descriptions and some of the locales simply for protecting, the people that serve our country and England, as spies. But yeah, I was in the locale, which was Vienna, Austria. At that time, I was doing an apprenticeship at the Vienna State Opera, and it was near the end of the Cold War, and USSR had been releasing a lot of the satellite countries that they had taken over, and they were finding that they really couldn't handle that, so they were letting a lot of those Eastern European countries go, just pulling out and saying, okay, you're no longer part of the USSR, and leaving no infrastructure. And what was even worse was the Russian mafia ran into all those countries and tried to take over those countries. So it was total anarchy for these poor folks. And so they had no choice. It was pack up and, try to, they were refugees and try to flee to the nearest Western European country, which just happened for a lot of them to be Austria. And like I say, I was apprenticing in Vienna, and I was also singing in a lot of cathedrals, which is something opera singers do also. Um, and was approached by some priests that said, "Hey, we're setting up these big, tent refugee camps on the edge of town. Um, would you like to get involved? Helping these people?" And it kind of started out like, well, maybe I could, arrange entertainment, and that kind of thing. And being in opera and being it, you know, just the doll of all, upper society with all the money. They were hoping I could also raise money, for much needed supplies, medical supplies, food, etc. And so I got involved, and I thought I was just going to be volunteering, but it became much more than that. And so I witnessed a lot of what was in this book, and I got to know all the spies involved in this book. So I decided, it started as a PTSD for me, a treatment. My doctor asked maybe that if I journaled and I tried writing, because I was doing music therapy and art therapy and that kind of thing with my PTSD. And they said, well, what if you were to write it down? And I thought, so I tried, and after the doctors read it, they were like, you need to make this a book. And I'm like, I'm kind of busy right now, because by then I had a full-time conservatory. I was still singing here in the States. I was like, I don't know when I could do that.
Yeah.
But I did start to try in 2015, and I ended up taking a class at one of the major universities near me, writer's class. And I was encouraged because, well, first the doctors encouraged me, and then the professors actually asked if I wanted to co-author with him. And I was like, whoa, he must think it's a pretty good story. And and so I decided not to do that. I wanted it to be my story. I wanted to learn how to craft it myself. Took 5 long drafts, and I also took a master class with James Patterson, and the TA there was also very encouraged. And he said, "Well, you've got a good story, but you don't know how to write suspense yet." you know, and they're the masters of that in that circle. So he gave me a lot of tips, and he was the one that also coined opera singing warrior, because the main protagonist is a woman, which was very rare in those days. You don't have many women working for the CIA in the field. There were some working at Langley or in other offices, but to be actually boots on the ground, there wasn't any. um, women in this theater. And so Caitlin Stewart, the protagonist, she's the one that breaks the glass ceiling on this. And you can imagine what she went through with a bunch of He-Man spies, both on the CIA team and the MI16 from UK. All of them are all men, and most of them come from military backgrounds originally. So she's, opera singer, just they don't know what to do with it. I mean, the guy that has is like the actual James Bond of MI6 at the time. Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond novels, would go to this man and ask him, okay, I'm thinking about writing this. Would that work? I mean, he was that guy. Okay. And that becomes Caitlin's trainer. And, he's older. He's 12 years older than her. He just thinks she should get her ball gowns and go home, that there's no way she can survive this. And, yeah, the CIA is saying, but we just want her to go in as a high profile spy. She can wear her ball gowns. She can go to the heads of state, to their homes. She can sing for them. And they're the culprits that are setting up what they're doing to the refugees, which is human trafficking, which is feeding into East Germany and keeping them afloat economically. So the idea is find out where these slave auctions basically are, and get the proof that it's happening, send it into NATO, Geneva Convention, everywhere we need to, and then um, it will, it will prove what they're doing, and it'll stop the trafficking, and that will actually bring down the Berlin Wall. So that was Mission Thaw, and there's a lot more to it, of course, but that's basically what happened. So yeah. So um, she becomes the first opera singing spy for the United States, and it's really a great cover when you think about it, because she has a reason to be there, right in the midst of it. Vienna State Opera, and she's you know she's very, very good. So one of the main antagonists is a rich Western European man who is making a million as the middleman on this trafficking thing. But he also loves opera. Like, he's an opera fanatic, and particularly Mozart opera, because Mozart came from Austria. And he's very nationalistic. He ran on the Nazi ticket and won. Okay. So where his politics are. And he's looking for the next prima donna that sings Mozart, that he can discover this person and then make that person, the prima donna of Austria. And he's absolutely obsessed with Mozart opera and Mozart sopranos. And along comes Caitlin. She's beautiful, she's young, and she's won all these competitions to get her to this apprenticeship. And so she's got the virtuosity, and the CIA knows it, to get this guy's attention. And so that's her job, and to infiltrate that whole neo-Nazi society, and somehow, act as if she goes along with that politics, so that they'll be loose-lipped, and she'll be able to get the information she needs. Plus, she at that time, you still had to, hide a lot of bugs everywhere, because we didn't have the satellites and such so much that we do now. But so yeah, I mean, in a way, it's the greatest cover ever, because the enemy just doesn't see it coming. Yeah.
Yeah. So how much of Caitlin Stewart is based on real people or real events?
The Mission Thaw is based almost like 98% on real truth. I changed the names and descriptions of people so that they and their families are protected, because these people are spies. And I didn't want to make it nonfiction and cite all that. And be quite frank, even though the statute of limitations is over for a lot of this sensitive material. I don't think the CIA would have let me if I would have tried to do a nonfiction book of this, and there are reasons. So yeah, um, but most of what's in this book happened verbatim. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's crazy. So, so why did you choose the Cold War era as your setting?
It's the story I wanted to tell, you know. I have a kind of a I've always got a purpose for things, and the purpose is really um, what happened in this story at this time at the end of the Cold War is about human trafficking. Well, t- um, the International Labor Organization says that there are 21 million people being trafficked today, in worldwide. This is a huge problem, and people don't want to really face up to it, and they think, well, it's not around me, you know, but actually it is. I live in a very small midwestern college town in the upper Midwest, 17,000 people. Okay. And we get our paper here is once a week. And a few weeks ago, right on the front of that paper was a story about 7 men that were arrested for trafficking underage girls and prostitution and all. I mean, it's right here in our backyards, folks. And we've got to start paying attention because it's mostly the most vulnerable people, you know, in our society. It's children, it's old, there's seniors that are being trafficked. I mean, you know, and then of course, young women and young girls. They are a great part proportion of what gets trafficked. And I'm also by reservations of Native Americans, and it is extremely terrible up there. Um, I mean, many young women go missing off the res, and um, lots of times they're trafficked to like the oil, you know, the Western states that have oil workers, and they're kept literally underground, you know, in these brothels. And once they're off the res, you know, the res police can't really go follow them. So then that becomes an FBI thing, and they're just overwhelmed right now. So all around me, there's trafficking. And, you know, so that means the whole state where I live, that's around them too. So people need to be more aware, and they need to start reporting it if they think they see something funny. Um, you know, whether it's, you know, they're coming out of a restaurant and they're looking down an alley and it's late at night, and all of a sudden these people are being lined up, and, you know, something just doesn't fit. Call and report it. You know, it's worth looking into. You know, if you think a bunch of people just got on in the back of a truck um, late at night in an alley. Well, yeah, that might be trafficking, you know. And
Yeah.
so go ahead and report it, and then, you know, help do something about it. Give it to some organization that's, you know, fighting this, you know. And of course the worst, you know, areas would be the, you know, places like Ukraine and that kind of thing right now. And
Yeah.
so the problem in Mission Thaw did not go away, it just got bigger.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to write this book. And this book's a trilogy. The first book's on human trafficking, and the second book will be on ethnic cleansing. Well, guess what? That's happening right now too. And so, you know, it's the Bosnian War that she gets involved with. And this time she's not using opera as a, you know, obviously in a war zone, she's not going to be singing opera. So they have her as a Red Cross worker. She goes in and she's just trying to find, you know, intel, like finding out what really is going on, because, you know, they're hearing these rumors of these massacres, and, you know, is it true or is it not true? And so she originally goes in just to, you know, again, every time that she's on a mission, she's supposed to just be an information gatherer, but some kind of crazy twist happened in the story, and she ends up becoming a combat agent, you know, and saving people. So, you know, that's pretty much how that one goes down too. And then the third one will be about she goes back to New York because she's tired of living in Europe, and she's trying to start a school with some other opera singers, and 9/11 happens, so she's back in. She retires for months, and that happens, and she's back in, and so that'll be the end of the Caitlin Stewart stories.
Oh, okay. So, what was the most surprising thing you learned while researching the Cold War?
Oh, you know, interesting enough, because I'm, on a lot of podcasts and I'm talking about a lot. And my PR team, um, some of my graduate students that study voice with me, they are like helping me with a lot of my social media. And one of the most hit posts that they've had is anything factual to do, just short little sentences about the Cold War. And so we just discovered that from Gen Z's, let's say, through Gen X, people don't have a clue. They really didn't cover that in history books much with them. They know very little about the Cold War. All they know is like, well, I think it had something to do with Russia, and I'm like, well, kind of, except it was USSR back then. I mean, that's just like something that Americans just don't know. Some kids don't even know that a Cold War exists. And so that has been really surprising to me, being there at the time and being involved. So, to know that just one or two generations below me doesn't know what anything about it, you know?
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So, how does Caitlin's identity as an opera singer enhance or complicate her work as a spy?
Well, it enhances the spy, because she's such a good actor. Taking acting lessons and being on the stage for years. I mean, she can convince this antagonist and his, all of his lackeys that she really does believe in their philosophy of neo-Nazi, being a neo-Nazi. She can act like a neo-Nazi. Now, that takes acting because you got to understand that Caitlin Stewart's father was in World War II.
Mhm.
And at the end, he ended up in northern Italy at the end of the war. He was in Patton's army. And then they said, well, we'll give you an extension and then, get more money or whatever. So he says yes. And so he ends up going up the Dachau and helps all the survivors, and has to do the mass burials and everything. So Caitlin has grown up with stories from her father about what he witnessed the Nazis doing.
Mhm.
And then he tells her and her brother, because the mother goes, well, why are you showing these kids? Because he took pictures of this stuff and sold some to history books, but he kept some and he shows the kids the pictures. And the mother goes, that's terrible. Why are you showing them? He said, because in their lifetime, they are going to witness and people are going to say this didn't happen and they will rise again. And everything by the late 80s, that's all true. Caitlin finds it's all true. She gets over there, and she's singing and she's taking German lessons and everything. And she hears this all the time that, well, the Holocaust really didn't happen. And she's got a father that literally, was at Dachau right after the war.
Yeah, this is an
So
interesting story.
yeah, so it's pretty crazy, So the acting, that's what enhances her as a spy is, and then she's got all the makings of high society, in her training, they said, you're going to be with the richest people in these countries, and you're going to have to sit down and have dinner with them, and you're going to have to dress right, and you're going to have to act right, and everything's going to have to be just so, the hair, the makeup, the shoes, whatever. Okay, and you're going to have to know what the cream spoon soup spoon is versus the clear soup spoon, and what a chilled, shrimp fork is. I mean, there can be 14 things, at the table setting, and how many wine glasses and everything, and and just every, like, it's like going to charm school to get ready for this job. Okay, and so if anybody can pull that off, it's probably an opera singer,
Yeah. Yeah.
to fit right in. And then the acting part is, oh yeah, I agree with you about that, Mr. Neo-Nazi. you know but but then what's hard about it is that artist, performing artist, you know visual artists, it doesn't matter, artists are probably some of the most sensitive people in our society.
Mhm.
And so it's very hard for Caitlin
Yeah.
to accept this stuff, but artists are also the ones, all through history, that, think of Bob Dylan, they get up and protest. And so that drives her also to do it, because it's the right thing to do to help these refugees. So, yeah, I think opera singing as a whole enhances her job. Yeah.
Nice. So, what message do you hope readers take away from this mission talk?
It's pretty simple. You have one runs into things, and you can either walk away and say, I don't want to get involved, or you can take a stand. And I hope what this story shows is that these people in these two spy rings, they sacrifice everything to take a stand. And that's the only way that things get better and change. And so that's what I hope that the readers, feel about it at the end.
Okay, nice. So, were you ever worried the book would be too politically charged or controversial?
I I don't think I ever worried about that, because if anybody wants to argue with me and say that human trafficking is good, well, they're just an idiot. They're just an idiot. Okay. So I didn't I didn't worry about that. I mean, there's been, from the very beginning, non-feminists have said, "Oh, an opera singer couldn't be a spy," but that's absolutely untrue. And so you're always going to have those people, and they're not all men; they're women too. But I believe that it's um, I think it's more, rather than political. Um, I was worried more about the graphic scenes, and I struggled with that through my different drafts. And at
Oh,
first, I mean, that first thing in PTSD, I hardly said anything. And then the doctor said, just kind of mentioned, an incident. And he was like, I just get the idea that, fact that you might have PTSD. There was a whole lot more to that. And so I'd write a little bit more. But I was scared because I didn't want to turn people off, and
yeah,
scare them or gross them out or whatever. And, by the time I got to James Patterson's group, they were like,
man.
"Bring it on, baby," and my teenagers kept like pushing me. And then the last friend that helped me edit the fifth draft, he really did that. He's like, "You got to get the action going. You have to let us know everything, so we really hate those guys." And so I did. And there are parts of my book that you'll go, "Woohoo!" They're pretty short, but I mean, you won't forget it anytime soon. You know, and the thing is, this is true. When people read my book, especially if they know me, they'll come up to me afterwards. My boss read my book pretty early on, and he came up and he was like, "Please tell me that one part wasn't true." And I'm like, "No, it was." And that's what's really scary. And he went, okay, that's going to bother me for a long time. And I'm like, good, because that's what these women go through.
Right.
And so I'm
Right.
not holding back. And I have not had one editorial review or professional review that has, I mean, they'll warn you. A couple of them, they were women, none of them men, but the women did warn you, like, oh, I'll let you know. Some stuff's pretty tough, but it's pretty short. Um, but no one has criticized me for that. They said, no, it really needs to be there. Then we know who we're dealing with and what we're dealing with. And you just really hope this team can get it together. And of course, it never looks like they're going to. Just one turn after another. The bad guys just keep winning.
Man.
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any musical performances or backstage moments in the book that
Yeah, yeah. I
it
did
is?
want to get that in there because that is why she is in this place at this time. She
Mhm.
came to be an apprentice at the opera. So I am an international opera singer. You know, I was able to well, first of all, this is in first person, and I wanted the reader to be literally on Caitlin's back from the moment she gets recruited over there all the way through the mission. So they're going to go on stage with her for her European debut very early in the book. And she gives a really good description of, you know, she's nervous, but she gives a really good description of that debut on the Vienna State Opera stage. And then after, you know, her bows and all, she goes backstage, and then you get an idea of what backstage of a date of a important European debut is like. You know, lots of reporters and that kind of thing. And so I think I've explained that very well. That's one scene, and then, you know, they go to the Sacher Hotel right across from the Opera House that night for dinner, and all the aficionados are there, and they're all like standing up as she walks by and stuff. And so you get kind of that, you get that first opera, you know, society that this guy's, you know, involved in, this Herr Leitner. Um, and and then you do get to see one opera ball, because that's how she gets in his villa to plant the bugs, you know. And so I mean, yeah, operas after that, it's very, very little, because it becomes more action oriented, and, you know, like I say, she becomes more than an information gatherer.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's enough opera in it, mentioned throughout. And because a lot of the scenes with that Herr Leitner, he loves to talk opera with Caitlin, you know, and so that's how she draws him in. You know, she fascinates him because of all of her training, her voice, and all the studying that she's done in graduate school about Mozart. So, yeah.
Nice, nice. So, what was the hardest scene to write in Mission Thaw? I remember you telling me one part was hard scene.
There's a part that after Caitlin does so much, and she does something at the end that was not planned at all, but someone got sick, and she had to you know, replace that person in that part of the mission. And she saw some horrendous things, and she goes into a type of shock afterwards. She's supposed to be you know, using a video camera to get the proof, and she gets all the proof, but it affects her very badly psychologically, and she just kind of becomes in a catonic state. And I would say that those chapters were the hardest, you
Oh
know.
man.
Yeah. And yeah, yeah, that would probably be the hardest. And I think the slave auction was really, really hard for me. I mean,
Yeah.
I sometimes I would write a you know, a page and a half, and I'd be like, I can't do any more tonight, you know. And then
Man.
I'd go back to it, you know. And it's, so I and all that's kind of together, because, you know, she goes to the slave auction, and then she has her um you know, moment of withdrawal, let's call it that. She gets better. I will tell you, she does get better. But yeah, I'd say those chapters were hard. And probably at the beginning when the MI6 guy's trying to convince her she's not tough enough to deal with this. He shows her some slides of an underground brothel in East Germany. That's tough too. Yeah.
That's crazy. So, let me ask you, what are you working on next? I remember you was saying you was doing the second book and the third book. When are those gonna be out? Like, are you
Well, I'm finishing the second book. I'll be sending it, I will be finished with the second book, writing it by the end of August. And that one's set in Bosnia a few years later during the Bosnian War. And that I always pick the most, happy subject. That one will be on ethnic cleansing, um, because that's what was happening, massacres and that kind of thing, between Serbian Muslims and Bosnian Muslims. And they were fighting over borders and that kind of thing. And so that's the time when Caitlin Stewart, she isn't an opera singer. Her cover is a Red Cross worker. So she can get in and get intel. But then, of course, it's not just information gathering. She falls into having to save some people. And so, yeah, that one will be finished written in August, and then it'll go to the editors and publisher. And then she'll start the third one, which is she's decided to come home to New York. And, she retires from the CIA, and her and some friends are starting a school and a little small opera company on Long Island. And boom, 9/11 happens. And that does immediately puts her right back in. So,
oh man.
and
It kind
it's
of reminds me of Red Sparrow a little bit. Like
a little bit. Yeah.
it a little bit.
Hmm.
Man.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing I think about with some of the um, Cold War women spy movies that have come out, is that I think they're a little unrealistic, as far as martial arts and that kind of thing. I mean, Caitlin knows martial arts. She was trained in martial arts, but I mean, she's not going to take on a big KGB officer that weighs 3 times what she does. I mean, she's not that kind of martial arts. I'm not saying that some women can't be. It's possible, but my nephew's a professional martial artist, um, and I would say, yeah, there are women out there that are small and can get the job done, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty
Yeah.
rare. And an opera singer's not going to be able to study martial arts like that. And so, these just all it is fighting and all that. I just don't find it interesting. I don't find it believable, really.
Yeah. So, my last and final question before I let you go is, where can my listeners find your books to buy them or download
Yeah,
them on ebook
yeah.
or
My book is on most things internationally, in the United States, Amazon Kindle, Barnes and Noble, Apple. um, in Canada, we've got Indigo and Kobo. And in Australia, we've got Booktopia. We're on Amazon UK, Amazon Europe, and Amazon China. So I mean, there's a lot of places you can find the book. And you can find so much information on the book, and you know a lot of social media posts that we've had, and the editorial reviews that we've had, all on ksparlingbooks.com.
okay, okay. I want to thank you so much, Kay, for being a guest on my podcast and sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
You have a great day.
All right, you too. Bye bye.
Hey everyone, I want to thank you all so much for listening to my interview with Kay. Definitely check out her books. I know I will. Because it sounds interesting, kind of reminds me of Red Sparrow. So yeah, definitely check it out. Have a great day. See you next time for the next interview. Bye.